Good morning, grade 10S. Our topic for today is going to be a continuation of the animal kingdom. So we would have started talking about, a few of the classes in the vertebrate phylum. So we're going to review, do a quick review over the ones that we already talked about. And then we'll also talk about the remaining two classes, which would be the fishes and the reptiles. And after we're done with that, we are going to move on to the invertebrates. So the first class that we would have talked about inside class would have been the birds. Okay, so some of the characteristics that we would have already talked about is that birds, they have feathers, they have beaks, they also have scaly feet. Okay, so these feathers, they basically make it easier for the bird to fly. Okay. Another trait that makes it easier for birds to fly, if you guys remember, would be that birds have very hollow bones. Okay, so here's a picture basically, showing that. So this bone over here is a human bone, and as you can see, it's a little bit more thicker. Okay, so because this bone is thicker, it's going to be heavier. Now, if you compare that to the bone of an eagle, you'll see that you have a lot of, air spaces or hollow spaces inside of this bone, and that's going to make it a lot more lighter. So because the bone is lighter, that's going to make it easier for the bird to fly. All right. Another trait we would have talked about inside class is that birds have a special organ in their digestive tract called the gizzard. Okay, so remember in, from class that I would have told you guys that the gizzard is basically an organ that's going to help the bird to digest its food. Okay, so it has a very rough texture, and that's going to help to, grind up the food because, as I said earlier, birds, they have beaks. Okay, so birds don't really have teeth that will help them to chew their food. So they still need something that's going to physically break down their food. And that's what they're going to use the gizzard for. Another thing, that happens in a gizzard sometimes is that, as a bird, eats off the ground, sometimes different sand grains or little pebbles are swallowed as well. And all of that gets, stuck inside of the gizzard, and the bird is basically going to use those sand and different grains like that to help it to further break down their food. Okay, because birds, sometimes they usually have a diet that I guess involves a lot of hard food. Okay, like nuts and different stuff like that, or seeds and different stuff like that. So they're going to need something that's going to help them to break down those hard foods such as seeds. Okay. Another trait we would have said is that, birds, they lay eggs that have shells. Okay. All right. Next, we would have talked about mammals. And I guess the special trait that all mammals have in common is that they're going to have mammary glands. Okay. So this is how uh, they are basically going to feed their young. Okay. So obviously their milk is going to come out of the mammary glands, and that's going to help these mammals to take care of their young. Another trait, that mammals have uh, is that they are going to be warm-blooded. And as we said inside class, when an animal is warm-blooded, it has the ability to regulate its own temperature. Okay, so with mammals, they have mammary glands. They give birth to live young, and they also uh, take care of their young. Okay, so they're actually going to nurse it for a while and basically, stay with their babies for, a few months. But it's going to vary, based on the species. But generally speaking, when it comes to mammals, they're going to take care of their young for a period of time. And that's different from other classes because, for example, with fishes, for example, they may just lay their egg and then, move on with their life and go about their business. But that's not the case with mammals. Mammals will stay by their kids, until they get to a certain size and that they can take care of themselves. Okay, another trait that mammal has is that they're going to have fur and hair. The reason why they have fur is to basically keep them warm. All right, we also would have talked about amphibians inside class. Okay, so some of the traits we would have talked about is that, you always find them living inside moist environments. Okay, so they're going to live nearby, I guess, a pond or a body of water, a body of fresh water. And the reason why they need to live near these moist areas is because they have to keep their skin moist. They have to have moisture on their skin. And as we talked about inside class, this is because frogs, even though they do have lungs, they also have the ability to breathe through their skin. And in order for them to breathe through their skin properly, their skin has to be moist. So their skin dries up, then they won't be able to, breathe through their skin. Okay. Also, frogs are cold-blooded. And with cold-blooded animals, basically they have no control over their, body temperature. They're going to have to rely on the environment. Okay, so if it's cold outside, then that means their body temperature is also going to drop and basically be in sync with their environment. So if it's hot, the frog body is going to be hot. If it's cold, their body, once again, the temperature is going to drop. Okay. And another thing that amphibians do is that they are going to lay their eggs inside the water. Okay, so their eggs, they're different from, bird eggs that have a shell. Their eggs are basically shellless. Okay, so this is why they have to be laid inside water because it's going to need that water to basically, prevent the egg from drying out. Okay, so if a frog was to lay its egg on land, from the I guess the heat from the sunlight, that's going to dry up their eggs, and that's going to cause the embryo inside of it to die. Okay, so this is another reason why amphibians live near moist. Well, they live in a moist habitat. Okay. All right. Another trait of amphibians is that they are going to go through something called metamorphosis. Okay, so as we discussed inside class, when an animal goes through metamorphosis, it's going to go through a rapid physical change, throughout different phases in its life. Okay, so for example, with a frog, when it's young, it looks like a tadpole. I mean, it is a tadpole. Okay, so it's going to have a tail and it's also going to have gills. Okay, but if you compare, how a frog looks when it's a baby to how it looks when it's an adult, you'll see that there's a dramatic, structural change. It started off with just, having a tail and being very, very small and living inside the water with gills. Okay, but by the time as it, becomes an adult, it has two legs and two arms, and now it has lungs, and it also has the ability to breathe through its skin. Okay, so this is what I mean when I say a, rapid structural change, as it develops into an adult. Okay, so the adult form of a frog has no resemblance to how it looked when it was a baby. Okay, so that's what metamorphosis is. Okay, so this is where we would have stopped inside class. And now we're going to move on to a new class. All right, so next we're going to talk about the reptiles. Okay, so some of the traits that reptiles have, it's going to have dry, scaly skin. And that's just to basically, protect it. So their skin is a little bit more tough than, other classes compared to other classes. And this is just there for extra protection. Okay. They also you find that they can live on land, and some also live inside the water. They're also cold-blooded. They're going to breathe with their lungs, and most of them are going to lay eggs, but some of them are also going to give, birth to live babies. Okay, so very few species give live birth. For example, in this picture here, where you see these baby snakes, this is an example of live birth happening. But for the overwhelming, majority of reptiles, they are usually just going to lay eggs. Okay, so some examples of reptiles. This right there, you have a Komodo dragon. You also have crocodiles. You have turtles, in this picture here. And then obviously you have snakes as well. Okay, so like I said earlier, reptiles are cold-blooded. And earlier we said that when an animal is cold-blooded, it has to rely on the environment to regulate its temperature. Okay, so this is why, lizards like to sunbathe, for example. Okay, they have to go out in the sun to warm up their body. Okay, because, they have no control over the temperature of their body. Okay, next we're going to talk about fishes. This is another class that's, once again, cold-blooded. All right, so a lot of the, I guess, vertebrates are cold-blooded. The only two that are warm-blooded are mammals and then birds. But the other three, the rest of them are going to be cold-blooded. And so, yeah, we already know what cold-blooded means. Another trait that fishes have is that they have a special organ called a swim bladder. Okay, so a swim bladder is very important to a fish. This is how a fish basically stays afloat. Okay, so we already know, fishes can swim. Obviously, that's what they're going to use their fins for. But this thing here called a swim bladder basically has air inside of it. Okay, so basically that's going to help it to float inside of the water. That's going to take away a lot of the work when it comes to them, I guess, supporting their weight inside of the water. Okay, so if you think about it, uh, if you were to, put a balloon or a ball, let me say a beach ball, on the water, obviously it's going to float above the water. So that's basically what a swim bladder does. It basically makes the fish buoyant. Okay, so if something happens to a fish swim bladder, that fish is going to basically sink all the way to the bottom of the ocean. Okay, so it needs this swim bladder to basically keep it floating and to prevent it from sinking. If the swim bladder gets infected, then the fish will lose all control, of its body. It's basically going to float upside down. Okay, so a swim bladder, that's very important to a fish. And like I said, it's a special organ that's going to trap air or contain air inside of the fish, and that's going to help the fish to swim. Okay, that's going to hold it, that's going to help it to float and make it a little bit more buoyant. And basically after that, the fish can then use, its fins to basically, swim through the water. All right. Another special feature that fishes have is that they have gills. Okay. So a gill is a special organ that basically allows a fish to breathe underwater. Okay, so that's the equivalent of lungs, uh, when it comes to breathing. All right. Obviously, fish are gonna lay their eggs in water because fishes they live in water, and they are also going to have scales on their body. Okay, so the scales is basically going to help to streamline the fish a little bit, which basically means that it's going to help the swim. It's going to help the fish to move through the water more easily. Okay, so like I was saying earlier, a fish has a streamlined shape. Okay, so what it means for something to be streamlined is basically that its body is going to be designed in a way that's going to make movement more efficient or easier. Okay, so basically you will find that the shape of a fish is always going to be, I guess, the same shape as a bullet, or I could say a teardrop. Okay, so if you look at this picture here, that'll basically show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so the front or the snout of the fish is always going to be pointed. Okay, and the rest of its body is basically going to have a very smooth shape, and that's going to allow this fish to move through the water more easily. Okay, so fishes are always going to have this streamlined shape. Okay, its body is going to be similar to, I guess, the shape of a bullet, or I guess you could also say, the a teardrop shape. Okay, so that allows it to glide through the water more easily. Okay. I guess another thing you could use to describe its shape would be torpedo shape. So basically, it always has this same shape. Okay. So in other words, you'll never find too many fishes that are, shaped like a box, for example, because if someone has a box shape, then that's going to be very hard for it to move through the water. All right, so it's streamlined shape. That's another thing that's going to help this fish to swim. Okay, so so far, there are three things that helps the fish to swim. One, it has an air bladder. Okay, remember that's what's going to help this fish to float or remain buoyant. Remember I said if there is no air bladder, then this fish is basically just going to sink to the bottom of the sea floor, uh, just like a rock, basically. So same way how you throw a rock into the water and it's gonna drop all the way down to the bottom. The same thing would happen to a fish if it did not swim bladder. Okay, next we said it has a streamlined shape, which basically means it's going to be torpedo shaped, or basically have a pointed snout, and then that's going to gradually just smooth over, and this streamlined shape basically makes it easier for this fish to move through the water. And the next thing that's going to help fishes to swim, obviously, is going to be its fins. Okay, so with these three things, that allows the fish to basically maneuver itself through the water. Okay, another trait, some fishes have, such as the shark and fishes that are part of that family, such as stingrays as well, is that they have cartilage bones. Okay, so their bones are not as dense as, I guess, animals that you would find on land. Okay, their bones are going to be cartilage like. So that allows their body to be a little bit more flexible, and it also makes their bones lighter. Okay, so obviously that's going to be another thing that's going to help the sharks and stingrays to swim, because if they have very light bones, that's going to make it easier for them to, I guess, support their weight. Okay, or make them less heavier, because obviously if something is too heavy, then I guess that might make it harder for them to stay afloat. Okay, so that's another thing that makes it easier for them to move. Okay, and sharks are predators, so obviously they're going to need every advantage that they can get to catch other prey or other fishes and stuff like that. Okay, so that's an extra, I guess, unique feature that sharks and rays have. Okay, so this picture here basically shows their, cartilage-like skeleton. And like I said, that makes their body even more lighter. Okay, so when it comes to the anatomy of a fish, uh, it's gonna have several fins, throughout its entire body. And basically it's going to use these fins to help it to swim. Okay, so at the top here, you have the dorsal fin. Right here, you have the pectoral fin. You have the pelvic fin here. You have the anal fin here. And then this right here is called the tail fin, or the caudal fin as well. But tail fin will probably be easier for you guys to remember. Okay, so this is the last class of the vertebrates. And in my next lesson, we'll be talking about invertebrates.